from working an overnight shift. Gravola is also facing aggravated cruelty to animal charges for allegedly stabbing the family dog. Tonight, she is in jail being held without bail.
December 24th, 2025, 6:30 in the morning. John Gravola pulls into his driveway in Secane, Pennsylvania, a bag of McDonald's breakfast in the passenger seat. He's been up all night working his shift at the UPS facility near Philadelphia International Airport. The kind of overnight work that pays the bills but leaves you exhausted, counting down the minutes until you can get home, eat something warm, and sleep. He's thinking about nothing in particular, maybe about the Christmas Eve plans later that day, maybe about how quiet the streets are this early on a holiday morning, maybe about absolutely nothing at all, because his brain is in that fog that comes after 10 hours of loading trucks in the cold. He opens his front door, and the family dog runs up to him, covered in blood. Not a cut paw, not a small injury. The animal is soaked in blood, limping, clearly in distress. And before John's mind can even process what he's seeing, before he can ask himself where this blood came from or what happened, his eyes move to the living room. His wife, Diane, is sitting on the sofa. She's holding a large kitchen knife, and she's calm, eerily, impossibly calm. John's standing there with a McDonald's bag in his hand, his work boots still on, trying to understand what reality he's just walked into. This is his home. This is his wife of over 2 decades. This is supposed to be Christmas Eve morning. And then Diane speaks. "I stabbed our daughter." Not "there's been an accident," not "please help," not "call 911," just a simple, direct confession. "I stabbed our daughter." John drops the bag. He runs to his daughter's bedroom, and what he finds there will haunt him for every remaining day of his life. 23-year-old Danielle Gravola is lying in her bed, eyes open but unseeing. Her face, her chest, her legs, her back, covered in stab wounds, multiple lacerations, deep and brutal. The bedroom walls are splattered with blood. The sheets are soaked through. His daughter is dead, and the woman who killed her is sitting calmly in the living room, waiting. This is the story of what happened in that house on Christmas Eve 2025. A story about a mother who murdered her daughter with no clear explanation, about a father who lost everything in the time it took to drive home from work, and about a case that's still unfolding as investigators desperately try to answer one question: why?
Here's the most disturbing part about Danielle Gravola's story. We barely know who she was. Not because people didn't care, not because she wasn't loved, but because Daniela lived quietly, privately, in a way that's become almost impossible in our hyper-connected world. No active social media presence, no public achievements documented online, no digital footprint that reveals her personality, her dreams, her daily life. She was 23 years old, living at home with her parents in a working-class neighborhood in Upper Darby Township, just outside Philadelphia. That's about all we know for certain. Was she in school? Unknown. Did she work? No records found. What did she do with her time? No one's saying. Who were her friends? They haven't come forward publicly. What made her laugh? What kept her up at night? What she wanted from her life? All of it remains a mystery. And that absence of information is haunting in its own way. Daniela existed for 23 years, formed relationships, had opinions and fears and hopes, and yet the public record of her life is almost completely blank. The only things we know about her come from the circumstances of her death. She lived in her childhood home on South Bishop Avenue in Secane. She shared that space with her mother Diane, 57, and her father John, who worked overnight shifts at UPS. There was a family dog. The neighborhood was quiet, middle class, the kind of place where people mow their lawns on Saturdays and wave to neighbors. By all accounts, the few accounts that exist, the Gravola family was unremarkable, normal. The kind of family that blends into suburban life without drawing attention. No one reported hearing arguments from their home. No one saw signs of trouble. The police had never been called to their address for domestic disputes. On paper, they were just another American family trying to make it work. But here's what we're learning. Case after case, tragedy after tragedy. Normal doesn't mean safe. Quiet doesn't mean healthy. And the absence of visible warning signs doesn't mean everything is fine. Behind the closed door of that modest home in Secane, something was deeply, catastrophically wrong. We just don't know what. The night before Christmas Eve, Daniela was in her bedroom. Whether she was scrolling through her phone, reading, watching something, or already asleep, we don't know. But at some point in those dark, early morning hours while her father was at work, her mother entered that room with a weapon and destroyed everything. To understand what happened, we need to understand the structure of the Gravola household, because that structure created a dangerous dynamic. Extended periods where mother and daughter were alone together. John Gravola worked the overnight shift at UPS, leaving in the evening, returning in the early morning. It's the kind of schedule that many working-class families know well. It pays better than day shifts, it keeps the bills paid, but it also means the person working those hours is essentially living in a different time zone from the rest of their family. While John was loading trucks from 7 p.m. to 5 a.m., Diane and Danielle were home together every single night. Just the two of them and the family dog, in a house that from the outside looked peaceful, but inside may have been filling with tension, resentment, or the early signs of a mental health crisis that no one recognized. Did they talk during those evenings? Did they avoid each other? Did they watch TV together, or retreat to separate rooms? We don't know. What we do know is that this pattern, husband at work, mother and adult daughter at home, had apparently been going on for years. And if there was conflict brewing, if there was deteriorating mental health, if there were arguments or tensions that should have been warning signs, they happened during those overnight hours when John wasn't there to witness them. Neighbors described the Gravolas as quiet, normal, unremarkable. One neighbor who spoke to media said they'd never heard raised voices, never seen anything concerning. The family kept to themselves in the way that many suburban families do. Polite waves, occasional small talk, but no deep connections that would have given anyone a window into what was really happening. This is critical to understand. Most family violence happens in private. Most mental health crises develop behind closed doors. And most people who eventually commit horrific acts of violence don't advertise their intentions to the neighborhood. Diane Gravola, 57 years old, had no criminal record, no documented history of mental illness, at least none that made it into public records, no prior police calls for domestic disputes. On paper, she was just a middle-aged woman living with her family in a quiet neighborhood. But on Christmas Eve morning 2025, she became a killer.
Let's go back to that moment when John walks through the door. It's 6:38 a.m. He's already seen the bloody dog. He's already heard his wife's confession. He's already found his daughter's body in her bedroom, the life gone from her eyes, the wounds covering her body, making it clear this wasn't a single moment of rage, but a sustained, brutal attack. He pulls out his phone and calls 911. And while he's on that call, while he's trying to explain to the dispatcher that his daughter is dead and his wife admits to killing her, Diane's behavior escalates into something even more disturbing. She starts talking about suicide, about how she wants to die, about how this is all wrong. And then, while John is still on the phone with 911, Diane takes that same knife she used to kill her daughter, the knife still covered in Danielle's blood, and stabs herself in the chest. But here's the thing. The wounds she inflicts on herself are superficial, not deep enough to hit vital organs, not placed where they'd cause rapid blood loss, not the kind of wounds someone makes when they genuinely want to die. They're theatrical, almost performative. After stabbing herself, Diane throws the knife with such force that it embeds in the living room wall, sticking there like something out of a horror movie. Then she strips off all her clothing, standing naked in the home where her daughter lies dead. She starts smashing things in the kitchen, plates, glasses, whatever she can reach, creating chaos and destruction while John is still on the phone with emergency services. The 911 dispatcher, hearing all this through John's phone, gives him the advice that may have saved his life. Get out of the house, now. John runs. He leaves his home, leaves his murdered daughter, leaves his wife who has become someone he no longer recognizes, and waits outside for police to arrive. When Upper Darby police get to the scene minutes later, they find Diane naked, covered in blood, some of it her daughter's, some of it the dog's, some of it her own from the superficial self-inflicted wounds. She's not cooperative. She doesn't comply with commands. Officers have to physically restrain her, a struggle that must have been as surreal as it was necessary.
And it's while they're restraining her, while they're trying to secure this woman who just murdered her own child, that Diane says something that will become one of the most chilling pieces of evidence in this entire case. Officer Inderbir Randawa would later testify that Diane looked at him and said, "Sorry, I should have stabbed myself first." Think about what that statement reveals. It's not a denial. It's not "I didn't do it" or "it was an accident" or "she attacked me first." It's an acknowledgement, a confession, and more than that, it's a statement that suggests her plan, her intention was to die by suicide. But instead of just killing herself, she decided to take her daughter with her. "I should have stabbed myself first," meaning I meant to kill us both, but I did it in the wrong order. This is what forensic psychologists call extended suicide or murder-suicide, when someone who plans to end their own life decides they can't leave certain people behind, so they kill them first. Sometimes it's a delusional belief that they're saving their loved ones from suffering. Sometimes it's a conviction that their family members can't survive without them. Sometimes it's something even darker that we can't fully understand from the outside. But that statement, "I should have stabbed myself first," tells us that this wasn't a crime of passion or a sudden explosion of rage. This was premeditated. Diane thought about this. She planned it. She went into her daughter's bedroom with a weapon, intending to kill. And then, after murdering Danielle, she apparently lost her nerve when it came to completing her own suicide. So now she's alive. Her daughter is dead. And everyone is left asking, why? When investigators processed the Gravola home that Christmas Eve morning, they found a scene of extreme violence that extended beyond just Danielle's bedroom. Blood wasn't confined to one room. It was throughout the house, on floors, on walls, tracked from room to room. The amount of blood suggested either a prolonged attack or significant movement after the stabbing began. In Danielle's bedroom, where her body was found, investigators documented multiple stab wounds, lacerations to her face, her chest, her legs, her back. This wasn't a single stab to a vital area. This was repeated, brutal violence, the kind of attack that speaks to either overwhelming rage or complete disconnection from reality. The weapon, a large kitchen knife with a black handle, was photographed where Diane had thrown it with enough force to embed it in the living room wall. When investigators removed it for evidence, it was covered in dried blood. But here's a detail that doesn't make sense and has never been fully explained. Investigators also found bullet holes in the walls. Bullet holes. This suggests that at some point during the attack or in the aftermath, a firearm was involved. Was Diane shooting at her daughter in addition to stabbing her? Was she shooting randomly in the house? Did she fire the gun at some point during her breakdown? The investigation documents mention these bullet holes as part of the crime scene evidence, but no further explanation has been provided. No gun has been mentioned in the charges, no details about whether Danielle was shot in addition to being stabbed. This is one of several frustrating gaps in the public information about this case, details that seem important but remain unexplained. Either investigators are withholding information because the case is ongoing, or there's confusion about what actually happened in those chaotic early morning hours. What we know for certain is that the family dog was also attacked. The animal sustained abdominal lacerations, deep cuts that required immediate veterinary care. Someone, presumably Diane, deliberately stabbed the family pet, adding a charge of aggravated animal cruelty to the murder charges she would face. The dog survived. It was transported to a veterinary clinic, treated for its wounds, and recovered. In a case where almost everything ended in death or destruction, the dog's survival is perhaps the only small mercy. When investigators searched the home under warrant, they also found evidence of Diane's destructive rampage in the kitchen: broken dishes, overturned items, the chaos she created while John was on the phone with 911. And they found one more crucial piece of evidence: license plate reader data that confirmed John's timeline. Automated cameras throughout the region had tracked his vehicle leaving the UPS facility between 5 and 5:30 a.m., traveling his normal route home, stopping briefly at McDonald's, and arriving at the house right around 6:30 a.m. This data did more than just verify John's story. It cleared him of any possible involvement. He was exactly where he said he was. There was no way he could have been part of this. He was simply a man coming home from work who walked into hell. Diane Gravola was arrested at the scene on December 24, 2025, and charged with criminal homicide, first-degree murder, third-degree murder, possession of an instrument of crime, and aggravated cruelty to animals. Let's break down what these charges mean, because the distinction matters. First-degree murder requires premeditation, evidence that the killing was planned, thought about beforehand, intentional. The prosecution would need to prove Diane didn't just snap in a moment of rage, but actually planned to kill her daughter. Third-degree murder is for killings that show extreme indifference to human life, but without the specific intent to kill. It's a lesser charge that acknowledges the death was unlawful, but may not have been premeditated. Criminal homicide is the umbrella term for unlawfully causing someone's death. Possession of an instrument of crime refers to having and using the knife as a weapon. Aggravated animal cruelty comes from the deliberate stabbing of the family dog. Later that same day, Diane was arraigned before District Judge Michael Burns. Given the severity of the charges, the overwhelming evidence, and the brutality of the crime, Judge Burns made a decision that surprises no one. He denied bail entirely. Diane would not be released under any circumstances while awaiting trial. No amount of money could buy her freedom. She was remanded to the George W. Hill Correctional Facility in Delaware County, where she remains as of this recording. A preliminary hearing was scheduled for January 6, 2026, just 2 weeks away from when this script is being written. At that hearing, prosecutors will present enough evidence to show probable cause that a crime was committed and that Diane committed it. Given that they have her confession to John, "I stabbed our daughter," her statement to police, "I should have stabbed myself first," the murder weapon with her fingerprints and the victim's blood, the crime scene evidence, witness testimony from John, the physical evidence of the dog's injuries, there's virtually no chance this case won't proceed to trial. The evidence is overwhelming. But here's where the case becomes legally complicated. Diane's defense team will almost certainly pursue a mental health angle. They'll argue, probably correctly, that their client was experiencing a severe psychiatric crisis when she killed her daughter. They may seek a guilty but mentally ill verdict or argue for reduced charges based on diminished capacity. And honestly, they're probably right that Diane was mentally ill when this happened. A woman who kills her own daughter on Christmas Eve morning, then mutilates herself and destroys her home while waiting calmly for consequences, that's not the behavior of someone whose brain is functioning normally. But here's the hard truth that we have to sit with. Mental illness explains behavior. It doesn't excuse it. Diane may have been psychotic, deeply depressed, delusional, or experiencing a complete break from reality. And if that's true, she deserves treatment in addition to accountability. But none of that changes the fact that Danielle Gravola is dead. None of that brings her back. None of that erases the trauma experienced by John, who lost his entire family in less time than it takes to drink a cup of coffee. Justice in a case like this is complicated. What does justice even look like when the perpetrator was clearly mentally ill? What does accountability mean when someone genuinely wasn't in their right mind? These are questions our legal system struggles with constantly, and they're questions that will be at the center of this case as it moves forward.
Here's what's making this case so frustrating for investigators, so agonizing for the family, and so difficult for the public to process. We still don't know why Diane killed her daughter. As of late December 2025, no clear motive has been released. No explanation has been provided. Diane hasn't given a statement beyond her initial confessions. And without understanding the why, we're left with a horrifying act that feels senseless, random, incomprehensible. But here's what we can piece together from similar cases and from Diane's behavior. Her statement, "I should have stabbed myself first," strongly suggests this was an extended suicide. She wanted to die, and for reasons that were real to her in that moment, she decided her daughter should die with her. In forensic psychology, there are several types of filicide, parents killing their children, and understanding these categories might help us understand what happened. Altruistic filicide is when a parent believes they're relieving a child's suffering or protecting them from something worse. Sometimes a severely depressed or delusional parent believes the world is too terrible for their child to survive in, so they kill them mercifully. Acutely psychotic filicide happens when a parent experiencing hallucinations, delusions, or complete disconnection from reality kills a child in response to voices or paranoid beliefs. Extended suicide is when a parent plans to kill themselves but believes their child cannot survive without them, so they kill the child first, often viewing it as an act of love rather than violence. Given Diane's age, 57, her daughter's age, 23, the lack of any known prior conflict, and Diane's suicidal behavior both before and after the murder, this case most likely falls somewhere in the intersection of extended suicide and acute mental health crisis. But that's speculation. Educated speculation based on patterns from similar cases, but speculation nonetheless. What we need, what the family deserves, what the legal system requires, is an actual explanation from Diane herself. Or, at minimum, a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation that can give us insight into what was happening in her mind on Christmas Eve morning. Was she experiencing a psychotic break? Had she been having suicidal thoughts for weeks or months? Was there a specific trigger that night? An argument? A perceived crisis? A delusional belief? Was this the culmination of long-term mental illness that had gone undiagnosed and untreated? Or was it something else entirely that doesn't fit into neat psychological categories? The investigation is ongoing. Psychological evaluations have likely been ordered. Extended family members, neighbors, anyone who knew the Gravolas is probably being interviewed to see if anyone noticed warning signs that make sense in hindsight. But as of right now, we're left with more questions than answers. And that absence of answers is its own kind of horror. Here's the terrifying truth that cases like this force us to confront. Severe mental illness can develop in anyone, at any age, with or without warning signs that others can recognize. Diane Gravola lived 57 years apparently without any documented mental health crises. No psychiatric hospitalizations on record. No suicide attempts that brought her to emergency rooms. No criminal history. No pattern of violence. She was, by all accounts that we have access to, a woman living an unremarkable life in a quiet neighborhood. And then one morning she murdered her daughter with extreme violence, mutilated herself, destroyed her home, and expressed regret only that she hadn't killed herself first.
This doesn't fit our comfortable narratives about how mental illness works. We want to believe that people who commit horrific violence always show warning signs. We want to believe that families always know when someone is struggling. We want to believe that tragedies like this are preventable if only someone pays attention. But the reality is messier and more frightening. Depression in middle-aged and older adults often doesn't look like the depression we're taught to recognize. It can manifest as irritability rather than sadness, as physical complaints rather than emotional ones, as gradual withdrawal that looks like normal aging or personality changes. Psychotic breaks can happen suddenly, even to people with no prior history of psychosis. Stress, hormonal changes, medical conditions, medication interactions, or seemingly nothing at all can trigger a first psychotic episode in someone's 50s or 60s. Suicidal ideation can be hidden incredibly well, especially by people who have made the decision to act on it. Once someone has committed to dying by suicide, they often become calmer, more at peace, because they've resolved the question that's been tormenting them. Family members sometimes describe how their loved ones seemed better right before they died, not knowing that better actually meant decided. So what should we have been looking for in Diane Gravola? What warning signs did people miss? We don't know. We may never know. And that's the most unsettling part. It's possible that Diane showed no outward signs at all. It's possible that whatever was happening in her mind happened entirely internally, invisible to even the people who lived with her and loved her. Or it's possible that there were signs, subtle changes in behavior, statements that seemed odd but not alarming, gradual withdrawal or personality shifts that John or extended family members noticed but didn't recognize as dangerous. In hindsight, everything becomes a warning sign. But in the moment, when you're living your daily life, when you're tired from working overnight shifts, when you're focused on paying bills and getting through another day, it's easy to miss the subtle indicators that someone's mental health is deteriorating. This is not about blame. John Gravola did nothing wrong. He couldn't have known. He shouldn't have had to know. The expectation that family members should be able to diagnose and prevent severe mental health crises is unrealistic and unfair. But it is about awareness, about understanding that mental health crises can happen to anyone in your family, at any age, with or without obvious warning signs. About knowing what resources exist for people in crisis, about reducing stigma so that people feel comfortable seeking help before they reach the point of catastrophe. Let's talk about John Gravola, because his story doesn't end with discovering his daughter's body. He has to wake up every morning in a reality where his daughter is gone and his wife is in jail for murdering her. He has to live in a world where Christmas will never again be a holiday he can celebrate, where every December 24th will be the anniversary of the worst day of his life. He lost his entire family in the time it took to drive home from work. One shift at UPS and everything changed forever. The psychological trauma he's experiencing is almost incomprehensible. This isn't just grief, though the grief of losing a child is already devastating enough. This is grief combined with betrayal, with horror, with the complete shattering of his understanding of reality and the people he thought he knew. How do you process that the person you shared your life with for decades, the person you thought you knew better than anyone, was capable of this? How do you reconcile the woman you loved with the woman who murdered your child? How do you walk back into that house, if you ever can? How do you sleep at night knowing what happened in the next room? How do you function when every single thing in your home is now connected to the worst trauma imaginable? And beyond the immediate psychological impact, there's the practical reality. John is now alone. His support system, the family unit he relied on, has been destroyed. He'll have to navigate the criminal justice system as the case proceeds, possibly testifying about the worst morning of his life, reliving it over and over in court. He'll have to make decisions about Danielle's funeral and burial while processing grief that hasn't even fully hit him yet. He'll have to deal with media attention, with neighbors' questions, with the inevitable curiosity about what happened in his home. And he'll have to do all of this while working through his own trauma, ideally with professional help from therapists who specialize in this specific type of loss. There are support groups for parents who've lost children to homicide. There are therapists who specialize in helping people process traumatic loss. There are resources for families affected by violence and mental health crises. But none of it is easy. None of it makes it better. None of it brings Danielle back or gives John his old life again. If you're reading this, John, please know, what happened is not your fault. You couldn't have known. You couldn't have prevented it. You did everything a good father does. You worked hard, you came home with breakfast, you called 911 immediately when you discovered what happened. You survived the unsurvivable. And while that survival may not feel like a gift right now, while you may be wishing you had been there that morning to protect your daughter, you deserve to heal. You deserve support. You deserve to find a way forward that honors Danielle's memory while allowing yourself to continue living. There are people who can help. Please reach out. Let's talk about John Gravola, because his story doesn't end with discovering his daughter's body. He has to wake up every morning in a reality where his daughter is gone and his wife is in jail for murdering her. He has to live in a world where Christmas will never again be a holiday he can celebrate, where every December 24th will be the anniversary of the worst day of his life. He lost his entire family in the time it took to drive home from work. One shift at UPS and everything changed forever. The psychological trauma he's experiencing is almost incomprehensible. This isn't just grief, though the grief of losing a child is already devastating enough. This is grief combined with betrayal, with horror, with the complete shattering of his understanding of reality and the people he thought he knew. How do you process that the person you shared your life with for decades, the person you thought you knew better than anyone, was capable of this? How do you reconcile the woman you loved with the woman who murdered your child? How do you walk back into that house, if you ever can? How do you sleep at night knowing what happened in the next room? How do you function when every single thing in your home is now connected to the worst trauma imaginable? And beyond the immediate psychological impact, there's the practical reality. John is now alone. His support system, the family unit he relied on, has been destroyed. He'll have to navigate the criminal justice system as the case proceeds, possibly testifying about the worst morning of his life, reliving it over and over in court. He'll have to make decisions about Danielle's funeral and burial while processing grief that hasn't even fully hit him yet. He'll have to deal with media attention, with neighbors' questions, with the inevitable curiosity about what happened in his home. And he'll have to do all of this while working through his own trauma, ideally with professional help from therapists who specialize in this specific type of loss. There are support groups for parents who've lost children to homicide. There are therapists who specialize in helping people process traumatic loss. There are resources for families affected by violence and mental health crises. But none of it is easy. None of it makes it better. None of it brings Danielle back or gives John his old life again. If you're reading this, John, please know, what happened is not your fault. You couldn't have known. You couldn't have prevented it. You did everything a good father does. You worked hard, you came home with breakfast, you called 911 immediately when you discovered what happened. You survived the unsurvivable. And while that survival may not feel like a gift right now, while you may be wishing you had been there that morning to protect your daughter, you deserve to heal. You deserve support. You deserve to find a way forward that honors Danielle's memory while allowing yourself to continue living. There are people who can help. Please reach out. What this case teaches us. This case is still developing. The preliminary hearing hasn't happened yet. We don't have Diane's psychological evaluations. We don't have a clear motive. The full story hasn't been told. But even with the incomplete information we have, there are critical lessons we can take from this tragedy. Lesson 1. Mental health crises can happen at any age. We tend to think of mental illness as something that manifests in teens and young adults, but severe depression, first psychotic episodes, and suicidal ideation can develop in middle age and beyond. Hormonal changes, life stressors, medical conditions, or seemingly nothing at all can trigger a mental health crisis in someone's 50s, 60s, 70s. If you notice significant changes in an older family member, increased irritability, withdrawal from activities they used to enjoy, statements about death or hopelessness, personality shifts, take it seriously. Don't dismiss it as just aging or going through a phase. Lesson 2. Suicidal ideation sometimes includes harming others. Most people who are suicidal only want to harm themselves, but in rare cases, particularly when severe mental illness or delusional thinking is involved, someone who plans to die by suicide may believe they need to take others with them. This is called extended suicide or murder-suicide, and while it's uncommon, it's more likely to occur in family settings. If someone expresses suicidal thoughts and makes concerning statements about family members, things like, "We'd all be better off dead," or "I can't leave them behind," this is an emergency that requires immediate professional intervention. Lesson 3. The absence of prior violence doesn't predict future safety. Diane had no criminal history, no documented pattern of violence, no previous incidents that would have raised red flags, and then she committed an act of extreme brutality. This is a hard truth. Past behavior doesn't always predict future behavior, especially when severe mental illness enters the picture. Someone can live for decades without violence and then, in the midst of a psychiatric crisis, do something unthinkable. This doesn't mean we should live in constant fear, but it does mean we should take mental health symptoms seriously, even in people who have never been violent before. Lesson 4. Family dynamics matter. The structure of the Gravola household, John working overnight shifts, leaving Diane and Danielle alone together for extended periods, may have been a factor in this tragedy. Not because John did anything wrong, but because that isolation potentially allowed a crisis to develop without anyone else noticing. If possible, families should maintain connections beyond just the immediate household. Extended family, friends, neighbors, community groups. These connections create safety nets that can catch warning signs or provide support during difficult times. Lesson 5. We need to talk about mental health before crisis occurs. The stigma around mental illness, especially in older adults, prevents people from seeking help until it's too late. We need to normalize conversations about depression, anxiety, and other mental health struggles the same way we talk about physical health conditions. If you're struggling, please reach out. If you notice someone you love is struggling, please speak up. Don't wait for a crisis. If you or someone you know is experiencing a mental health crisis or suicidal thoughts, please reach out immediately. National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Call or text 988, available 24/7. This is a free, confidential service that provides support for people in distress and connects them with local resources. You don't have to be actively suicidal to call. If you're struggling, if you're worried about someone, if you just need to talk to someone who understands, they're there. Crisis Text Line. Text HOME to 741-741. If you're more comfortable texting than calling, crisis counselors are available 24/7 via text. National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, Helpline. 1-800-950-NAMI 6264. NAMI provides education, support groups for family members, and resources for navigating the mental health system. If someone is in immediate danger of harming themselves or others, call 911. Don't hesitate. Don't wait. Don't assume someone else will handle it. If you believe someone is about to act on suicidal or homicidal thoughts, emergency services need to be involved immediately. For families navigating mental illness, NAMI offers support groups specifically for family members dealing with a loved one's mental illness and educational programs that help you understand what your family member is experiencing. Mental Health America provides free mental health screening tools and resources for finding local services. The National Institute of Mental Health offers comprehensive information about mental health conditions and evidence-based treatments. Warning signs that someone may be considering suicide. Talking about wanting to die or kill themselves. looking for ways to kill themselves, researching methods, acquiring means, talking about feeling hopeless or having no reason to live, talking about being a burden to others, increasing use of alcohol or drugs, acting anxious or agitated, withdrawing from activities, sleeping too little or too much, visiting or calling people to say goodbye, giving away prized possessions, aggression or recklessness. Additional warning signs when someone may harm others, expressions about taking others with them, expressions that family members would be better off dead, talk about not being able to leave people behind, combining suicidal statements with expressions of anger at family members, acquiring weapons or expressing unusual interest in methods of harming others. If you see these signs, do not wait. Do not assume someone else will intervene. Do not worry about overreacting or being intrusive. The potential embarrassment of being wrong is infinitely better than the alternative. Remembering Danielle. Danielle Gravola was 23 years old when she died. We don't know much about who she was, and that absence of information is itself significant. In a world where most people leave extensive digital footprints, where social media documents our lives in exhaustive detail, Danielle's privacy stands out. Maybe she was someone who valued real connections over online performance. Maybe she was shy, or introspective, or simply didn't see the point of broadcasting her life to strangers. Maybe she was still figuring out who she was and what she wanted, the way most 23-year-olds are. What we do know is this: she deserved to live. She deserved to celebrate her 24th birthday, her 30th, her 50th. She deserved to figure out her path in life, to make mistakes and learn from them, to fall in love, to find meaningful work, to experience all the joy and pain and ordinary beauty that comes with a full life. She deserved to be safe in her own home, in her own bedroom, with her own family. And that safety was stolen from her by the one person who should have protected her above all others. There's no making sense of that. There's no silver lining that makes it okay. There's no lesson that makes her death worthwhile. But what we can do is remember her as more than just a victim in a true crime case. She was a daughter who lived with her family. She was a person with her own interior life, thoughts and dreams and fears that were real and valid and important even if we'll never know them. Her privacy in life should be honored even as the circumstances of her death become public. She didn't ask for this attention. She didn't choose to become a cautionary tale or a case study or a true crime video. But her story matters, not because of how she died, but because her life had value, and because the circumstances of her death point to larger issues we need to address as a society. Mental health care, family violence, the warning signs we miss, the support systems that fail. If this case does anything, let it be this. Let it make us more aware of mental health struggles in our families. Let it reduce the stigma around seeking psychiatric help. Let it make us braver about having difficult conversations. Let it remind us that normal families can be hiding. As this crime story or documentary is being analyzed, the case is still active. The preliminary hearing is scheduled for January 6, 2026. Psychological evaluations are likely ongoing. Investigators are still piecing together what happened and why. We don't yet know what Diane's mental state will be determined to have been on Christmas Eve morning. We don't know whether she'll go to trial or accept a plea deal. We don't know what sentence she'll ultimately receive or whether mental health treatment will be part of her incarceration. What we do know is that this case has already left permanent scars on everyone it touched. John Gravola will carry this trauma for the rest of his life. Extended family members are grieving a young woman who's gone and grappling with the reality that another family member killed her. The Secane community has had its sense of safety shaken. Everyone who reads about this case will be left with questions that may never have satisfying answers. And somewhere in a cell at George W. Hill Correctional Facility, Diane Gravola sits with whatever remains of her mind after what happened. Whether she's still delusional, whether reality has returned and she's now facing what she's done, whether she has any insight at all into why she murdered her daughter on Christmas Eve morning. This case will move through the legal system. There will be hearings, possibly a trial, eventually a sentence. The media will cover it, true crime channels will discuss it, and then it will fade from public attention the way most cases eventually do. But for the people directly affected, it will never fade. This will be the defining trauma of their lives, the loss they carry forever, the thing that changes everything. All we can do is learn what we can from it, be more aware, be more willing to have difficult conversations, be more supportive of people struggling with mental health issues, be more active in reducing stigma and increasing access to care. And remember that behind every true crime case are real people experiencing real pain. This isn't entertainment for them. It's not a puzzle to be solved or a mystery to be discussed over dinner. It's the worst thing that's ever happened to them, and they have to live with it every single day. So, if this video impacted you, don't just watch it and move on. Think about the people in your own life. Check on them. Ask how they're really doing. Notice changes in behavior. Be willing to have uncomfortable conversations about mental health. And if you're struggling yourself, please reach out. There are people who want to help. There are resources available. You don't have to suffer alone, and you don't have to reach the point of crisis before seeking support. Call 988 if you're in crisis. Text HOME to 741-741 if you need someone to talk to. Visit NAMI.org for family resources and support groups. Your life matters. The lives of the people you love matter. And sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply be willing to say, I'm worried about you. Can we talk? Thank you for watching this case with the respect and seriousness it deserves. Thank you for remembering Danielle Gravola not as a statistic, but as a person whose life had value. And thank you for taking mental health seriously, for yourself, for your family, for your community. Rest in peace, Danielle. You deserved so much more than this.